Hi, and welcome to Charity's Vegan Kitchen. Today's tutorial is on our white loaf bread mix. When you receive your bread mix, it's going to come in a packet like this. You'll have your actual bread mix, you'll have a packet of yeast, a packet of dusting flour, and your instructions. There will be a QR code on the instructions that will lead you to this video to make it easier for you on your baking journey. We're going to go ahead and get our white loaf bread mix started, and this is for those who do not have a mixer and want to do it by hand. So we're going to start out with our 1 cup of warm water. We're going to pour that into our large bowl. We're going to sprinkle in our yeast. I like to give the yeast a little stir up. It helps it get happy. And then we're going to set this aside and let it sit for 20 minutes. Okay, so now that our yeast slurry is nice and happy, we're going to go ahead and add our 1/3 cup of avocado oil to our slurry. I'm going to stir that up just a little bit. And then we're going to add all of our dry mix contents. Again, you would shake up your bag before you would add it in. And then I'm just going to use my rubber spatula to stir it up a bit. And I have my dusting flour. I put it into a bowl and I have it set aside because I will be using that now. So I'm just going to flour my hands a little bit. And I'm going to complete the mixing with my hands. Until it's fully incorporated. Then I'm going to move on to my counter to complete the kneading process. So I'm just going to scrape off the balance of what is inside the bowl. I'm going to flour my surface. And I'm going to move my dough onto my counter. And to get a really nice and smooth dough, we want to make sure we build up that gluten really well. It takes about 20 to 25 minutes of vigorous kneading to reach that point. Depends on how heavy my hand is that day. Some days I can do it in 20 minutes. Other days it may take me a little bit longer. And I do sometimes hand knead because my kids like to get in and make the dough with me. So when they're participating, I like to knead by hand so that we do it together. So I'll be back once we've been fully incorporated. So we're back and I've hand kneaded my dough for about 20 minutes. And this is what it looks like. So I'm just going to place it on a floured surface. I'm using a small sheet pan with some parchment paper on it. And then I'm just going to shape this into an elongated shape. You can do it round if you want. That's fine. You're going to have to reshape it again on the second, before the second proof. And now you can dust this with flour if you prefer and put a linen cloth over it. But I find that it gives it a thicker skin. If you like a really thick crust in your bread, then that might be ideal for you. I prefer just to spray a little bit of avocado oil over it. Just use my fingers to coat that. And then I just put some saran wrap on. If you don't want to use saran wrap, you can put it in a deep container or bowl, and you can put a wet cloth over that. So you're going to want to wet the linen cloth with some warm water, and then you want to wring it out. You don't want it to touch the bread. You just want it to cover the surface area of the bowl that you're putting it in. If you do use saran wrap, you want to make sure that you're not tightening it over the dough because you want that dough to rise. Also keep in mind that because you hand knead it takes a little bit more for the gluten to form. So your dough may need a little more time to rise. So you want to go ahead and make sure that you're giving it enough space for that. And we're going to prove this for 75 minutes. Okay, so now that our bread has done its first prove, this is what it looks like. Beautiful prove, nice and smooth. So what we're going to do now is just kind of shape it out. It's okay for some of the air to come out. We're just reshaping it. It's okay for it to have air bubbles. That's completely normal. You're going to want to grease your loaf pan. This is a 9 by 5-inch pan. And we're just shaping our loaf. Fits perfectly. Now we're going to grease the top like we did before. Now, because this loaf was kneaded by hand, depending on the temperature also inside your home, typically can take anywhere between 10 to 15 minutes extra, more than if it was kneaded in the mixer. Depending on how dense it is, they tend to be a little bit denser when they are kneaded by hand. But we're going to go ahead and score it. We're going to score at an angle. You can use your scoring tool or a serrated knife. Either one works beautifully. And you're going to score, you're going to do 2 score lines from the top and pull at an angle. That was with our knife. You don't want to go in too deep. We're not splitting the dough apart. We just want it to expand as it rises. And one with my scoring tool. And then we're going to recover that with our saran wrap. And I'm going to prove it at 60 minutes. But if I notice that it's still a little dense, then I'll prove it for another 10 to 15 minutes. So our loaf finished proving. So I initially set it to prove for 60 minutes, but because my house is kind of cold today because I lowered the AC down because I'm doing a lot of baking, it took a little bit longer. So I added an extra 15 minutes. But this is what it should look like. It should come up off of the sides about 1.5 inches. And now we're going to put this in the oven and we're going to bake it at 400 degrees for 30 to 32 minutes. Now, every oven has a different heating gauge. So some ovens run a little bit hotter than others. So let's start at the base. So let's start at 30 minutes and you check your loaf and see if that's how you like it. I don't mind a darker crust, a darker exterior. Some people like it very tan. I personally like a darker crumb on my bread. So gauge it to see how you like it and then go from there. But the recommended baking time is 30 to 32 minutes. Okay, so now we're back with our completed baked loaves. And I wanted to show you the difference between a dough that's been kneaded in a mixer and one that's been kneaded by hand. Because when you knead the dough by hand, it takes a little bit more effort. The loaf tends to be a little bit more dense. But as you can see, there's not much of a difference there. The, the dough that was kneaded in the mixer is slightly higher. You can definitely knead the one by hand a little bit more and then allow it to prove a little bit more if you want it to rise a little bit more. But at the end of the day, it's still a beautiful result. And this is what it looks like on the inside. Beautiful white loaf, very soft. And this is the dough that was kneaded in the mixer. As you can see, there really isn't much difference. They're both quite beautiful. And they're both very soft. A couple things to keep in mind. When you take your bread out of the oven, ensure that you allow it to cool 3 to 4 hours prior to slicing. There's a lot of moisture still trapped inside your bread, so you want that to release before you start slicing it. It also allows for a more stable structure when slicing. Now I use a bread box And this box I got from Amazon, but this is what I use to store our loaves at home. And they last about 5 to 6 days in this box. You also want to keep in mind that if the area that you're storing your bread in is quite warm, it may not last as long. Now, our loaves have no preservatives in them, so they're not going to last as long as store-bought bread, obviously. But you can also freeze them and they freeze quite well. As you can see, it's quite beautiful to slice. You can do a thin slice, you can do a thicker slice. I use a slicing machine at home so that we get very even slices. So this loaf was baked for 30 minutes. As you can see, the crumb is quite light. And this loaf was baked for 32 minutes. You see, it's just slightly darker, but it does have a firmer crust. So let's talk about freezing. If you're planning on freezing your bread, you want to ensure that you put it in a plastic bag and that it's sealed quite well. And as long as you store it properly, it will hold